Got the tab up and out of the way. Probably cut that off later, but I want to get this on there so the injectors are sealed. So it's a tight fit, but it looks like it's going to fit okay. Everything seems to line up. Into that little adapter mounting stud thing that the kit comes with, which is 10mm. Screws into that spot on the fuel rail. And then we tighten everything down. See how that looks. Should be good. So I didn't like using these flanges on here. So I ended up putting a nut and washer underneath this because it just wouldn't line up right. And I feel a lot more confident about the way it's set up now. I think this is better. So this just clips on underneath the intake manifold like this, and then I just connect the hoses. So not exactly the funnest thing to figure out, but we're almost there. So it's just figuring out where everything connects. So there's a lot of frustration with this bracket here, and let me get my camera in here so you can see what's going on. So in the illustration, I'll show you here in a second what the issue was, but I added a washer down here underneath that bolt, and then had to bend the bracket a little bit more, and then I flipped the bracket that's on the idle control valve back to the kind of stock position. So I had to flip the bracket back over and then mount it. And now I've got clearance behind it. It's not rubbing up against the heater hoses. It's not going to touch the starter. You know, it now has a tiny bit of room behind it, and it feels like the positioning of the hoses, there isn't any stress on anything. It feels like everything's still clipped in and it's okay. So that was a mess, but now let me show you what it says over here. So on these directions here, this is a perfect example. So right here, they're saying that it should be lined up, and you flip the bracket over, and this is how it sits. But if you look in the photo, the clip where the connector goes into the back of this idle control valve is going directly through the heater hose. That makes no sense. So yeah, this thing has to be moved out of the way, and it's just not the best design in this bracket. So what I did is I bent this part just a little bit more, flipped the bracket back over to the stock position, added a washer here, and now that seems to fit fine. So if you run into that issue with that stupid bracket, at least now you'll know what to do with it, because that was not fun. Okay, so I'm making some progress here. I've got my vacuum line set up. This one's just temporary. It's actually fuel line. Going from check ball into the T, then I've got the T going into the bottom of the manifold that ends up back here. So that's kind of set there temporarily. And then I've got the oil dipstick tube bolted back on, and then my fuel line bracket right here. With this all tightened down now, the way the idle control valve is sitting, I think this is pretty good. It's pretty much out of the way. I still have to hook it up right there. But I've got the bottom of the oil collector on the PCV valve hooked up, going down into the dipstick tube, and then I've flattened out this original bracket for this piece right here. so I could have it off to the side. This seems to hold up okay. This is going into that line that I added originally with the little single adapter. So I think all the vacuum stuff is hooked up for the most part. I think everything is where it's supposed to be. So I just have to connect this hose to the PCV valve, and then that hose that goes off of right here on the idle control valve into the airflow meter connector tube thing. And then after that, it should be pretty much ready to start. They don't really give good directions on where the vacuum stuff is set up at, so you just kind of have to wing it. Luckily, there's only 3 lines that you have to deal with, so it's just figuring out what goes where. But I think I have it correct. We'll find out in a minute. It's pretty good. The only thing that I don't like is this valve. So this one goes into the block somewhere, or maybe it's a switch, and then you've got this vacuum line that goes to the check ball into the T. I saw another guy do this in another video where he drilled 2 holes and kind of mounted it up in here, so maybe that will happen for that, but to test it, that should be okay for now. Just not my favorite spot for it. Down there like so. The adapter plate goes right there. And then that bolts up to the body. Okay, it's starting to look more normal. So I've now got this screwed down. I don't like how it's sitting, but it's back on. Cooling lines are back on. I still need to get a hose clamp for the brake booster. This is reconnected. All this stuff is back on. So just a few more mods, then I'm ready to start this thing. So I'm at the point where I've got everything back together. One thing that I am not super proud of, so I got this back together, but you see those 2 hose clamps there? I had to create an extension off of the idle control valve to go feed up correctly to the bottom of the rubber boot for the mass airflow sensor going into the throttle body. So there's that. Other than that, I'm pretty much ready to go. The only thing I have left is my temperature control setup. Okay. Easy peasy. Alright, would you look at that? Tight fit. But now that will just slide in there. I don't want to slide in too hard. I can push it all the way in. But I have got to wash the inside of this box out, and then it's ready to install. Factory tube that hooks up to the mass airflow sensor, and it's like a gigantic velocity stack. So by opening it up with this hole, I'm doubling the amount of air that's going in through the panel filter before it gets to that. So that should help make it breathe a little easier. Okay, so now it's time for the airbox to go back in. And I've got my hole drilled into it now. So now it's just putting in the air temperature sensor into this port here, which is a nice tight fit. And then we will plug that in wherever the plug is for it. And the only thing that's left is mounting these brackets, and then of course putting coolant back in the system. seems to be running very smooth too. So the only other thing that's not so great is the fuel rail cover. Yeah, it just sits really high and weird, but yeah. They do make a replacement version for this, so I don't know. Maybe I'll try to modify it. I already did try to trim it out a little bit, and I did a pretty crappy job, but if I take the risers out, maybe I can get a little more flush. I don't know. I'll have to play with that. But you can see how much higher it sits. Like, you can see the injectors now. Okay, well, whatever. Alright, first hard pull with this. Let's see what this thing is like. Ready? Go. Jesus Christ. That is fucking fast. Oh. God damn. Ooh, yeah. That is quick. That is really quick. Unfortunately, the app's not working, but that's fast. So that first drive was a huge noticeable difference. This thing is relentless above 4,500 RPM. It's just amazing what this intake does. I highly recommend everybody does this because it really makes a massive difference. I tried to do some data logging on my phone. I couldn't get anything to work. It kind of sucked. But in the video clips, just looking at my 0 to 60 times, I'm probably like 5.9 seconds, somewhere around there. One was 5.8, 5.9, and 6. And that was without dumping the clutch in first gear or anything like that. Just kind of a quick takeoff, but not squealing the tires or anything. So, yeah, it's healthy. Really healthy. I'm guessing right now with just this mod, it's probably a good 20 horsepower gain above 4,500 RPM. Now you do take a slight horsepower hit and torque hit below 4,000 RPM, but it's so minuscule that you don't notice it, and the gains are so relentless on top that it's so worth it. I did do a few things that were slightly different, so let me explain to you what I did there. So on the Airbox, I wanted to use a factory Airbox because this is actually designed really well and it's quiet, and I wanted to keep this car fairly quiet. So what I did was, underneath this bracket, I put a 2.5-inch hole in the Airbox that draws air from underneath the headlight, and that just allows the Airbox itself to pull in a lot more air. Now the other thing I did was I moved the temperature sensor. Instead of putting it in the boot here, I put it here in the Airbox. Now there's a little hole, I don't know if you can see it, that I drilled into, and this thing just happens to fit in there. So that is nice and secure in there. So what's next? So the next thing I gotta do is the ASC delete, and that's this. And basically what that does is it tells the car to throttle down the engine for traction control. And it uses ABS too, so when we do that, we have to unplug some of this stuff down here, this actual module. We want to get rid of it. This thing is tied into the ABS. The ABS will still work if we put a resistor on here, but I just want to get rid of that. And this butterfly valve that this thing sits on is actually a lot smaller in diameter than the actual throttle body on the car. So by doing that, we're going to open up another restriction and should bring out just a little bit more. So anyway, there's still a lot to be done. Now, in the beginning of this video, I said this thing will probably get 40 horsepower. Now, to get this setup to 40 horsepower, it's going to also require an ECU tune. That'll be later on down the road, and I do plan on dynoing this at some point. So anyway, I hope you guys like this video. Subscribe to my channel for more information like this. Give me a thumbs up. Otherwise, we'll talk to you guys later. See ya.